The apartment smelled like cheap microwaved popcorn and defeat. I stood in the doorway of what used to be our bedroom. My bedroom now, I supposed, watching Marcus throw his clothes into a duffel bag with the methodical precision of someone who'd rehearsed this scene in his head 1,000 times. Each jai of fabric made a soft whump against the nylon, a rhythm that seemed to mock the irregular stuttering of my heartbeat. The afternoon light came through the blinds in dusty slats, turning everything the color of old photographs. "You can take the TV," I heard myself say. My voice sounded hollow, like an echo of an echo. Marcus didn't look up. His hands, those hands I'd held during movie nights, during my father's funeral, during the miscarriage, moved with efficiency, rolling his socks into tight balls. "Already told you I don't want your charity." Alex, my charity. As if 3 years of splitting rent in Seattle's inflated market was charity. As if the groceries I bought when he was between gigs were charity. As if believing in his app development dreams while my own graphic design business barely scraped by was somehow me being magnanimous. I leaned against the doorframe, feeling the paint crack slightly under my shoulder blade. "What about the cards?" His hands paused for just a fraction of a second. "What cards?" "You know what cards," I swallowed, tasting something bitter. "The collection in the closet, my dad's collection." "Oh," Marcus zipped the duffel with a sharp scritch that felt like claws on a chalkboard. "Those. Yeah, I mean, you can keep them. I don't need a bunch of dusty cardboard, Alex." The casualness of it hit me harder than if he'd screamed. 4 white cardboard boxes, each containing carefully sleeved cards my father had collected over 30 years. Pokemon mostly, from the earliest sets. Base set, jungle, fossil, the holy trinity before the game exploded. He'd been one of those weird dads who picked up the cards when I was 7, not for investment, but because he thought the artwork was neat. We'd spent Sunday mornings at kitchen tables across 3 different apartments, sorting them by type, by evolution, by the small numbers in the corners that I wouldn't understand mattered until much later. "They were his," I said quietly, "and now they're yours." Marcus hefted the bag onto his shoulder. "Do whatever you want with them. Throw them away, sell them, I don't care. I'm not trying to take anything that's not mine. Not yours." Nothing in this apartment had ever really been ours, had it? The furniture from IKEA, assembled during wine-drunk evenings when we still laughed. The plants on the windowsill that I watered because he always forgot. The coffee maker that he claimed to love but never cleaned. Even the framed photo of us at Pike Place Market. His arm around my shoulders, both of us squinting into the sun. That felt like mine alone now. A souvenir from a trip I'd taken by myself to a place that happened to have him in it. "I'll send you my new address once I'm settled," he said, moving past me into the living room. The floorboards creaked under his weight. He'd gained 15 pounds since we moved in, stress eating through the slow dissolution of us. "For mail and stuff." "Sure. And Alex," he stopped at the front door, hand on the knob. The afternoon light caught the silver of the handle, making it gleam. "I hope you find what you're looking for." I wanted to ask what he thought I was looking for. Wanted to ask if he knew that I'd found it already. 3 years ago when he'd smiled at me across a crowded pride parade and offered me half his funnel cake. Wanted to ask when exactly he'd decided that what we had wasn't enough, but I didn't ask any of those things. I just nodded. The door clicked shut with a sound like a bone breaking cleanly. I stood there for what might have been minutes or hours, watching dust motes dance in the wake of his departure. Then I walked to the closet and pulled down the 4 white boxes, each one labeled in my father's careful block letters. Pokemon 1999 to 2000, Pokemon 2001 to 2002, Pokemon Japanese, Pokemon Misc, and Promos. The boxes were heavier than I remembered. 3 weeks later, the eviction notice came on butter yellow paper that seemed obscenely cheerful. 72 hours to vacate. The apartment management company had been patient, they said, but 3 months of missed rent was their limit. I'd used my savings to cover Marcus's portion after he left, then missed September when the graphic design contracts dried up, then October when my car needed a new transmission, then November because by then I was choosing between rent and eating. I chose eating. Barely. Now it was late November, and Seattle was doing that thing where it couldn't decide between rain and sleet, so it just spat a miserable combination of both at your face whenever you stepped outside. I packed what I could fit into my Honda Civic. Clothes, laptop, the boxes of cards because I couldn't leave them, a sleeping bag, my phone charger. Everything else got sold on Facebook Marketplace for pennies on the dollar or left on the curb with a free sign. The Civic's heater didn't work. I'd been meaning to fix it for 2 years. I slept in the car for 6 days, parked in different Walmart parking lots each night, waking up every few hours when the cold seeped through the sleeping bag and made my bones ache. On the 7th day, I drove to my sister's place in Tacoma and sat in her driveway for 20 minutes, watching through the kitchen window as she made breakfast for her twin daughters, flipping pancakes with the easy confidence of someone whose life had turned out okay. I couldn't knock. Couldn't admit that her flaky artist sibling had failed so spectacularly that I was living in my car. So I drove to the nearest Starbucks and used their bathroom to wash my face with paper towels and hand soap, then sat nursing a small coffee for 3 hours while I applied to jobs I wouldn't get. By December, I'd sold everything sellable except the cards. Those stayed in their boxes in my trunk, a promise I'd made to myself, to my father, that I wouldn't let go of the last physical thing that proved he'd existed, that we'd existed together. Then my car got towed from an overnight parking spot I'd thought was safe. The towing fee was $385. I had $23 in my bank account. I stood in the towing company's grim office, all flickering fluorescent lights and the smell of motor oil and old coffee, and felt something fundamental crack inside me. The woman behind the plexiglass partition snapped her gum while explaining the daily storage fees. Through the window, I could see my car in the impound lot. Everything I owned locked inside it. "I can pay you Friday," I tried, knowing Friday would come and go with the same empty bank account. "Cash up front or it stays impounded." Snap, snap went her gum. "Storage is $45 per day." I did the math. By Friday, it would be $520. By the following Friday, $835. The car itself was worth maybe $2,000 on a good day. I walked out into the cold December drizzle and pulled my phone from my pocket. The screen was cracked from when I dropped it getting into the sleeping bag last week. 3% battery. No charger because the charger was in the car. I called the one person I could think of who might have $400 to spare. "Alex?" Marcus's voice sounded tinny and far away. "Everything okay?" "I need to get my stuff out of the impound," I said. "The cards are in there. Dad's cards. I need to get them out." A pause, background noise on his end, voices, laughter, the clink of glasses. He was at a bar. Of course he was at a bar. Marcus had always landed on his feet. "How much?" he asked. $385, but I can pay you back. I just need a few weeks to— "Alex, I can't. I'm sorry. I'm between things right now, and Rachel." He stopped. "Look, I just can't swing it." Rachel. Of course there was a Rachel. There was always a Rachel waiting in the wings. "What about the cards?" I heard myself ask. "If I sign them over to you, could you sell them? Use whatever you get to cover the fee and keep the rest?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Pokemon cards? Alex, those things aren't worth anything? Nobody collects that stuff anymore?" "Some of them might be worth something. There's a first edition Charizard, I think, and some other holos." "I mean, I guess I could try, but I wouldn't get your hopes up. My friend Kevin used to collect cards. I'll ask him if he wants to buy them. Might get you like $50 for the lot." $50. 4 boxes of my father's 30 years of Sundays. $50. "Yeah," I said. "Okay, whatever you can get." "Where are you staying?" Marcus asked, and there was something in his voice, pity maybe, or guilt, that made me want to scream. "With a friend," I lied. "Okay, good, that's good. Look, I'll talk to Kevin tomorrow, see what he says. Text me when you get a chance and we'll figure out the logistics." "Thanks, Marcus. Alex, you know I still care about you, right? This isn't— I want you to be okay." My phone died before I could respond. I spent that night under the University Bridge, wrapped in a blanket I'd shoplifted from a Goodwill, because I'd stopped caring about being a good person somewhere around the 3rd night in my car. There were others there, a small community of people the city had forgotten, but they kept to themselves, and I kept to myself, and we all pretended not to notice each other's desperation. The next morning, I walked to the public library when it opened and used their phone chargers. Marcus texted me around noon. Kevin says he'll give me $200 for everything. That work? $200. For a collection my father had spent thousands on, that contained cards that 7-year-old me had held with reverent, sticky fingers, that represented every Sunday morning of my childhood, when the world had felt safe and full of possibility. "Yeah," I texted back. "That works." We arranged to meet the next day. I had to walk 40 minutes to the coffee shop we'd agreed on because I couldn't afford bus fare. Marcus was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with a guy I assumed was Kevin, mid-30s, expensive hoodie, the kind of cultivated scruff that said he spent time on his appearance. "Alex, hey." Marcus stood up halfway, that awkward dance of someone who didn't know if they should hug or shake hands. We did neither. "This is Kevin. Kevin, Alex." Kevin nodded at me. "Marcus says you've got some old Pokemon cards." "In my storage unit," I lied smoothly because I couldn't admit they were sitting in an impounded car and I was homeless. "Base set, jungle, fossil, some Japanese. First editions." Cool, cool." Kevin pulled out his phone. "I used to collect these as a kid. Probably worth like $20 now, but nostalgia, you know? I'll give you $200 for the lot sight unseen. That's generous." $20. He thought they were worth $20 and he was paying $200 out of nostalgia. I should have walked away, should have figured something else out. But I was so tired and so cold and I hadn't eaten a real meal in 4 days. And the idea of having $200, of having anything, was too seductive to resist. "Okay," I said. Kevin pulled out his wallet and counted out 10 $20 bills onto the table. Marcus pushed them toward me. "You sure about this?" he asked quietly. "These were your dad's." "He's dead," I said flatly. "He doesn't care." We made arrangements. I'd get the cards from storage and drop them at Marcus's apartment the next day. I took the cash. We had bought a $6 sandwich from the coffee shop because my hands were shaking and I needed to eat something before I passed out, then walk back to the bridge. That night, I used $50 of the $200 to get my car out of impound. They let me pay partial to retrieve my belongings. I loaded the 4 white boxes into my backpack and took them to Marcus's apartment building. He'd moved to Capitol Hill, a nice modern place with a doorman and everything. I left the boxes with the doorman because I couldn't face seeing Marcus's new life, his new apartment, the proof that he'd moved on while I'd moved down. "Boxes delivered," I texted. "Got them," he replied. "Kevin's gonna pick them up tomorrow. Take care of yourself, Alex." I didn't respond. I spent the remaining $150 on a week at a sketchy motel in South Seattle, where the shower sputtered rust-colored water and the sheets smelled like cigarettes and broken dreams. On the 8th day, I left and went back to my car. January came in frozen and cruel. I'd gotten a temporary gig doing data entry for a marketing firm, enough to buy food and gas, but not enough to get a place. I kept telling myself it was temporary, kept telling myself I'd figure it out, kept ignoring the way my cough had gotten worse, the way my chest felt tight, the way I couldn't seem to get warm no matter how many layers I wore. On January 19th, I woke up in my car in a Safeway parking lot and couldn't catch my breath. Everything hurt. My chest, my head, my joints. The world had a fuzzy, distant quality, like I was watching it through frosted glass. I tried to start the car, but my hands wouldn't cooperate. Tried to reach for my phone, but couldn't remember where it was. The last thing I remember was the sound of sleet hitting the windshield, that soft tick, tick, tick like time running out. Then nothing. Then, the smell of cheap microwaved popcorn and the sound of someone packing. I opened my eyes and I was standing in a doorway. The doorway. Our bedroom doorway. My heart lurched, my breath caught, and for one wild second I thought I died and this was hell, being forced to relive the worst day of my life on infinite loop. But no, this was wrong. Different. The light was all wrong. November light, not January. Afternoon sun, not the thin gray dawn I died in. And I was standing, not lying frozen in my car. And I could breathe. My lungs pulling in air without that terrible drowning sensation. "You can take the TV," I heard myself say. The words came out of my mouth, but I hadn't decided to say them. They just happened. Like a record playing, like a script I was reading without meaning to. Marcus didn't look up from his packing. "Already told you I don't want your charity, Alex." My hands were shaking. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself and felt the pain crack under my shoulder blade, and this was wrong. This was impossible. This was a dream, I thought desperately. I'm dreaming. Or hallucinating. Pneumonia causes hallucinations. I'm dying in my car and my brain is showing me this cruel fantasy. But it felt too real. The scratch of my sweater against my collarbone, the smell of Marcus's cologne, that sandalwood thing he'd worn for 3 years, the creak of the floorboards, the dust motes dancing in the November light. What about the cards? my mouth said, and I remembered saying this, remembered this exact moment, this exact conversation. Oh, God. Oh, God. Marcus paused. What cards? You know what cards. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. The collection in the closet. My dad's collection. I knew what he'd say next. Knew it with the certainty of someone who'd lived it already. Oh, those. Yeah, I mean, you can keep them. Oh, Marcus zipped his duffel. Those? Yeah, I mean, you can keep them. I don't need a bunch of dusty cardboard, Alex. The world tilted. This wasn't a dream. Dreams didn't have this kind of detail, this kind of perfect, terrible accuracy. I died. I died in my car on January 19th, homeless and alone and sick. And now I was here. 2 months earlier, watching Marcus pack his bags for the first time. Time travel, rebirth, a second chance. The thought hit me with such force that I actually staggered, had to catch myself on the doorframe. Marcus glanced up, frowning. You okay? Yeah, I managed. Just dizzy. Haven't eaten. He nodded, already back to packing. Of course he was. In the original timeline, he'd leave, I'd spiral, I'd sell the cards for $200, I'd die. That was the pattern, the groove the universe had already carved. But I was here now. I was aware. I could change things. The cards, I'd sold them to Marcus for $200. Kevin had bought them for nostalgia, thinking they were worth $20 at most. But I'd looked it up later, during those hazy, desperate library computer sessions when I was still trying to make sense of how my life had fallen apart so completely. I'd looked up Pokemon card values just to torture myself with what I'd lost. The first edition base set Charizard alone, if it was mint, if it was graded, could be worth $30,000. More, maybe. And my father had been meticulous. Everything in sleeves, in perfect condition, stored carefully in those white boxes. I'd sold $80,000 worth of cards, maybe more, for $200. I'd given them to Marcus, who'd given them to Kevin, who'd probably sold them for their actual value, and was currently living in some nice condo somewhere while I died in a Safeway parking lot. They were his, I said quietly, and this time the words were mine, not the script's. Marcus sighed. And now they're yours. Do whatever you want with them. Throw them away, sell them. I don't care. I'm not trying to take anything that's not mine. In the original timeline, I'd let him leave. I'd pulled down those boxes and stared at them and let them become just another burden to carry, another piece of my father I'd eventually lose. Not this time. Actually, I said, and my voice came out stronger than I expected, I'm going to keep them. I'm going to hold on to them. Marcus shrugged. Whatever. He finished packing. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the knob, and I waited for it. I hope you find what you're looking for. I hope you find what you're looking for, he said, but this time I had an answer. I already have, I said. I just didn't realize it until I lost it. Marcus frowned, confused, but he didn't ask, just nodded and left. The door clicked shut with that same bone-breaking sound. I stood there for 5 seconds. 10. Then I ran to the closet and pulled down all 4 boxes. So my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped them. I ripped the tape off the first one, Pokemon 1999 to 2000, and pulled out the first sleeve. A holographic Charizard stared back at me, breathing fire across the card face, its edges sharp and perfect, a small first edition stamp above the card art. I started laughing. Couldn't help it, laughing and crying at the same time, holding this stupid piece of cardboard that represented everything. Childhood and loss and second chances, and the universe's bizarre sense of humor. I'd died. I'd literally died, and I'd been sent back to this moment, this exact inflection point, given the chance to not make the same mistakes. I wasn't going to waste it. The first thing I did was call my sister. It was 4:37 p.m. on a Tuesday in November. I checked my phone 3 times to make sure. Checked the date, checked the calendar, checked everything until I was absolutely certain I was when I thought I was. Then I called Michelle. Alex, what's wrong? She picked up on the first ring, voice tight with worry because I never called her, not unless something was broken or bleeding or both. Nothing's wrong, I said, and I was still sitting on the floor surrounded by open card boxes, tears drying on my face. Can I ask you something weird? Weirder than you calling me at 4:30 on a Tuesday? Marcus and I broke up. A pause. Oh, Alex, I'm sorry. Are you okay? Do you need me to come over? I can be there in. I'm fine. I'm good. But I wanted to ask, that time you offered to help me with my business, to invest or whatever, is that still on the table? Another pause, longer this time. Michelle had offered 6 months ago to loan me money to expand my graphic design work into a proper studio, to hire help, to advertise. I'd been too proud to accept, too determined to make it on my own, too stupid to realize that accepting help wasn't weakness. Of course, she said slowly. Alex, what's going on? You sound strange. I sound strange because I'm about to sound crazy, but I need you to trust me, okay? Something happened. I can't explain it, but I need to make some changes. Big changes, and I need help. Okay, Michelle said in that careful voice people use when they're worried you're having a breakdown. What kind of changes? I need to get some things appraised. Pokemon cards, Dad's old collection. The cards from the closet? I thought you were saving those. I am again. I laughed, slightly manic. Look, I know this sounds insane, but I think they might be worth something. A lot of something, and I need to find out for sure, and I need to do it without screwing it up. How much is a lot? I don't know, thousands, maybe tens of thousands. Michelle sucked in a breath. Jesus, Alex, really? I think so. Dad was so careful with them. They're all first editions, mint condition. I looked it up once. I stopped myself before I said in the future when I was desperately trying to understand what I'd lost. I looked it up recently. Some of these cards are worth serious money to collectors. Okay, Michelle said decisively, shifting into her take charge mode. Okay, don't do anything. Don't sell anything. Don't even touch them more than you have to. I'm going to make some calls. Brian's brother collects trading cards, not Pokemon, but he'd know how to get them professionally graded. There's a whole system, right? PSA grading or something? Yeah, PSA, BGS, grading companies that authenticate and grade condition. Right. Let me talk to Brian. We'll figure this out. She paused. Are you really okay? With Marcus, I mean? I looked around the apartment. Same furniture, same plants, same everything, but it all looked different now. Lighter somehow. Like I'd been carrying invisible weight and someone had finally set it down. I'm better than okay, I said honestly. For the first time in a long time, I actually know what I'm doing. Brian's brother Connor was a 35-year-old accountant who spent his weekends at comic conventions buying vintage Marvel cards and could talk for 45 minutes straight about the difference between PSA 9 and PSA 10 grades. He showed up at my apartment the next day with a jeweler's loupe, white cotton gloves, and the kind of reverent excitement usually reserved for archaeologists opening tombs. Holy shit, he breathed, holding the first edition Charizard up to the light. Holy shit, Alex, this is... Do you know what you have here? Tell me, I said, even though I knew. Even though I'd spent hours in a library 2 months in the future researching exactly what I'd lost. If this grades as a 10, and I'm not saying it will, PSA 10s are incredibly rare. But if it does, $30,000? Easy. Maybe more at auction? He set it down with shaking hands and reached for the next card. What else is in here? We spent 3 hours going through all 4 boxes. Connor made a spreadsheet. He took photos. He handled each card like it was made of spun glass and dreams. The preliminary estimate made my head spin. $80,000 to $120,000 for the entire collection, assuming most cards graded 8 or higher. The Charizard alone could fund a year of rent. The complete first edition base set, which my father had somehow managed to complete, could be worth $40,000 as a lot. You need to get these graded, Connor said, carefully sleeving the last card. I can help you submit them to PSA. It'll take a few months to get them back, but it's worth it. Graded cards sell for multiples of raw cards. How much does grading cost? Depends on the service level and declared value. For cards like these, you're looking at maybe $50, $100 per card for the valuable ones. Bulk submissions for the commons and uncommons. Call it $3,000 all in, maybe? $3,000 I didn't have, but if I submit them now, when would I get them back? PSA's backed up. Probably March, April, maybe longer. March, after I would have died in my car in the original timeline. I made a decision. What if I don't grade them? What if I sell some raw, just the most obviously valuable ones to get capital? Then grade the rest. Connor winced. You'd lose money. Raw cards sell for a fraction of graded. But they still sell, right? People buy raw first edition Charizards. Oh yeah, you could probably get $8,000, $10,000 for this one raw right now to the right buyer. Graded PSA 10, you'd get triple that, but I need money now, I finished. Not in 4 months. Connor nodded slowly. There are reputable dealers. I can make introductions. But Alex, if you wait... I can't wait, I said, and it was true in ways I couldn't explain. I couldn't wait because I'd already lived the timeline where I waited, where I held on to things until desperation made me stupid, until I sold everything for pennies because I had no other choice. This time, I'd sell strategically, sell smart, sell enough to stabilize my life, then hold the rest for grading, for appreciation, for the future I was building instead of the one I'd barely survived. Connor introduced me to a dealer named James, who ran a card shop in Ballard and had enough reputation and Google reviews that I felt reasonably confident he wouldn't screw me. We met at a coffee shop, a different one than where I'd met Marcus and Kevin, because I couldn't face that place yet. And I brought 5 cards in a portfolio. The first edition Charizard, a first edition Blastoise, a first edition Venusaur, and 2 of the rarest Japanese promos from my father's collection. James examined them with the same careful reverence Connor had shown. He pulled up recent sales on his phone. He made notes. Finally, he looked up. I can offer you $32,000 for all 5 cash today. My heart hammered. $32,000? These are in exceptional condition. Your father took amazing care of them. The Charizard alone is worth $10-12K raw. The Blastoise and Venusaur, $4-5K each. The Japanese promos are harder to price, but I have buyers lined up. $32K is fair market value. He paused. But honestly, if you grade these first, you'd get more. Maybe a lot more. I need the money now, I said. James nodded. I get it. Look, I'll make you a deal. $35,000 for all 5? And I'll help you get the rest of your collection graded at cost. I submit bulk orders monthly and can add yours. That way, you're getting fair value today and setting yourself up for the future. I thought about the original timeline, about selling everything for $200, about Kevin getting these exact cards and probably selling them for exactly what James was offering now, pocketing the profit while I spiraled into homelessness. $35,000 and you help with grading, I repeated. Deal. We shook hands. James pulled out a bank check. He'd come prepared, apparently, and I signed over the cards with my heart in my throat. $35,000. More money than I'd ever had at one time in my life. Your dad would be proud, James said as he carefully packed the cards into a hard case. Most people have no idea what they're sitting on. They store cards in shoe boxes, let them get bent and faded. Your dad preserved history. He just thought the art was neat, I said, throat tight. Best reason to collect anything? James replied. I deposited the check in my bank account and watched my balance go from $847 to $35,847. Sat in my car in the bank parking lot and just stared at the number on my phone screen until it stopped feeling real and started feeling like responsibility. First, rent. I paid 3 months in advance to my landlord, who'd been starting to make noises about needing the apartment for family. Paid in full, got a receipt, bought myself time and security. Second, car. I took the Civic to a mechanic and got the heater fixed, the transmission serviced, everything tuned up properly for the first time in 2 years. Drove away with heat actually flowing from the vents and almost cried at the simple luxury of being warm. Third, food. I went to a real grocery store and bought real food. Fresh vegetables, good bread, coffee that didn't come in a red plastic tub. Filled my fridge for the first time since Marcus left. Fourth, Michelle. I paid her back for every loan she'd given me over the years. Small things, $50 here, $100 there, but they added up. She tried to refuse. I insisted. She cried. We both cried, actually, standing in her kitchen while her daughters watched cartoons in the next room. Where did this come from? She asked, holding the check I'd written her. The cards? I sold a few. Dad's collection was worth more than I thought. How much more? I smiled. Enough. Enough to get back on my feet. Enough to start over. Michelle hugged me tight. To smelling like her vanilla body lotion and mom stress and home. I'm so proud of you, she whispered. Dad would be too. Fifth, business. I took $5,000 and invested it in my graphic design work. New software licenses, A better computer, advertising, a proper website instead of the janky WordPress thing I'd been limping along with. I reached out to old clients, pitched new ones, started actually treating my work like a business instead of a side hustle. By mid-December, I had 3 new contracts and a waiting list. By January, the January where in another timeline I died in my car, I had enough income to start looking at real apartments, places with heating that worked, and doors that locked and windows that didn't look out on parking lots. By February, I'd moved into a studio in Fremont with hardwood floors and a view of the ship canal. It wasn't big, it wasn't fancy, but it was mine, paid for with money I'd earned and saved and invested, and no one could take it from me. The rest of the cards came back from PSA in late March. Connor called me, voice shaking with excitement. "Alex, you need to sit down." I'm sitting. The base set, the complete first edition base set that your dad had, every single card graded 9 or higher. The Charizard you kept, the other Charizard, came back as a 10. My stomach dropped. A 10? A fucking 10, Alex? PSA 10 first edition base set Charizard. Do you know what those sell for? I did. I'd researched it obsessively in the original timeline, torturing myself with knowledge that came too late. A lot, I said faintly. Try $50,000, maybe more. And that's just one card. Your complete graded set? Alex, we're talking $150,000 minimum. Maybe $200,000 if we auction it properly. I sat down harder, even though I was already sitting. The numbers didn't feel real. Couldn't be real. This was Pokemon cards, pieces of cardboard with pictures of cartoon creatures. This wasn't supposed to be worth, but it was. The market was insane, nostalgia-driven, fueled by people who'd grown up with these cards and now had adult money to spend on childhood dreams. And my father had accidentally assembled a collection worth a house down payment. I want to sell half, I said. Keep half. What? Sell half the collection, the duplicates, the less rare cards, enough to lock in profits, keep the other half long-term. This market's only going to get crazier, right? Connor laughed. You sound like an investor? I sound like someone who's learned not to sell everything when they're desperate, I said. Can you help me do this smart? Absolutely. We sold roughly half the collection through a combination of private sales and auction houses. The PSA 10 Charizard went for $58,000 to a collector in California. The complete base set holos sold as a lot for $47,000. Various Japanese promos, first edition Team Rocket cards, and other high grades brought in another $62,000. After Connor's commission, after PSA fees, after taxes that I properly reported because I wasn't about to screw up this second chance by getting audited, I cleared $142,000. I kept the other half of the collection in a safety deposit box, investment for the future, insurance against disaster, proof that my father's Sunday mornings had mattered. With the money, I did something I'd never done in my first life. I built something sustainable. I rented a small office space and hired 2 other designers. I pitched bigger clients. I raised my rates because I could afford to be selective. I built a business that could survive without me, that had systems and processes instead of just my frantic energy. I started therapy, actual therapy with an actual therapist, not just crisis hotline calls at 3 a.m. I started running, bought good shoes, followed a training plan, ran a 10K in April that I never would have attempted in the original timeline. I bought a new car. Nothing fancy, a used Subaru with working heat and working everything, but mine owned outright, no payments. I reconnected with friends I'd lost during the Marcus years, went to dinner parties, hosted a few. To learn to cook something other than ramen and scrambled eggs. I lived. And through all of it, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, kept waiting to wake up back in my Civic, frozen and dying. This whole beautiful second chance revealed as a hallucination, conjured by an oxygen-starved brain. But I didn't wake up. Days became weeks, became months, and I stayed here, alive, warm, solvent, building a life instead of merely surviving one. In June, almost 7 months after Marcus walked out that door, I ran into him at a pride parade. I was there with coworkers, wearing a tank top and ridiculous rainbow sunglasses, drinking overpriced lemonade and watching the floats go by. And there he was, 30 feet away, arm around a woman's shoulders. Rachel, presumably, both of them laughing at something on her phone. He looked happy, well-fed. He settled. In the original timeline, this would have destroyed me, would have sent me spiraling into jealousy and self-pity and that toxic stew of emotions that came from watching an ex move on while you were stuck in place. But I wasn't stuck anymore. I watched him for a moment, this man I'd loved and lost and mourned, and felt nothing. Not anger, not longing. Just a distant, pleasant neutrality. Like seeing an actor from a TV show you used to watch, but haven't thought about in years. He was part of my old life. The life where I'd made small choices that led to disaster, where I'd been too proud to ask for help, too scared to value myself properly, too willing to give pieces of myself away until there was nothing left. This was my new life. Then the one I'd built with Pokemon cards and second chances, and the hard-won knowledge that came from dying and somehow getting to try again. I turned away before he could see me and rejoined my coworkers, and it felt like closing a book I'd already finished reading. A year after Marcus left, a year after I came back to that November afternoon, I threw a party. My apartment was bigger now. A 2-bedroom in Capitol Hill with exposed brick and room for all my plants and enough space to host 20 people without everyone being crammed together. I'd invited designers I'd worked with, friends from my running club, Michelle and Brian and their daughters, Connor who'd helped me navigate the card market, even James the dealer who'd given me that first check. We ate too much food and drank too much wine, and someone put on music from our teenage years, and we all danced badly and laughed about it. Around midnight, when most people had left and it was just me and Michelle washing dishes in my kitchen, she said, "You know, I've never asked what actually happened. With Marcus, you broke up and then suddenly you were different. Like someone flipped a switch." I dried a wine glass slowly, thinking about how to answer. "I realized I'd been living small," I said finally, making decisions based on fear instead of possibility, and I decided to stop. "Just like that?" "Just like that," Michelle smiled. "Well, whatever it was, I'm glad. You're happier than I've ever seen you." I thought about the cards in my safety deposit box, about the PSA 10 Charizard I'd kept instead of sold, to worth probably $80,000 now and climbing, about the business I'd built and the life I'd reconstructed from the rubble of my first timeline's mistakes. I agreed. I really am. That night, after everyone left, I sat on my couch in my quiet apartment and pulled up photos on my phone. Me with my father, age 7, sitting at a kitchen table with Pokemon cards spread between us. His hands guiding mine, showing me how to sleeve them carefully, how to organize them, how to appreciate the art. "I kept them, Dad," I whispered to the photo. "I kept your Sundays." The cards had saved me, had given me a second chance at life. But more than that, they'd taught me something I'd needed to learn. Value wasn't just monetary. It was in the time spent, the care taken, the love embedded in small, repeated actions. My father had collected cards because he thought the art was neat, because it gave us something to do together, because Sunday mornings were sacred and should be filled with things that mattered, even if those things were just pictures of cartoon creatures on pieces of cardboard. He'd accidentally created a fortune, but what he'd really created was a foundation. Something solid enough to build on even after death, even after disaster, even after dying and somehow coming back. 2 years after the rebirth, I got an email from Kevin. "Hey, Alex," it read. "Long shot, but do you still have those Pokemon cards Marcus was going to give me? I was cleaning out my storage and found some old cards, and it made me think of them. I'd still be interested in buying them if you're looking to sell. Let me know." I stared at the email for a long time, remembering the original timeline, remembering sitting across from Kevin and Marcus in that coffee shop, agreeing to sell $80,000 worth of cards for $200, remembering the desperation that had made me say yes. I thought about ignoring the email, just deleting it and moving on. But there was something darkly funny about the whole thing, the cosmic joke of it. So I wrote back, "Hey Kevin, thanks for reaching out. I actually ended up keeping the collection. Had it professionally appraised and graded. Turns out they were worth significantly more than either of us thought. Sold some pieces for around $150K, still holding the rest. Hope you're doing well. Alex." He never replied. I imagined him reading that email, doing the math, realizing what he'd almost bought for $200, the missed opportunity, the fortune that slipped through his fingers. In the original timeline, he'd gotten that fortune. Had probably sold those cards for their real value while I died homeless and alone. But this wasn't the original timeline. This was the second draft. The revision, the version where I'd learned from my mistakes before making them, where I'd valued what I had before losing it, where I'd chosen differently when offered the same terrible choices. The universe had given me something impossible, a literal do-over, and I'd taken it and built something better. I still didn't know why, didn't know if it was magic or science fiction or a dying brain's last elaborate dream, didn't know if somewhere there was still a timeline where I died in that Civic, where Marcus and Kevin had gotten rich off my father's cards while I'd frozen to death. It didn't matter. This was the timeline I was living in. This was the life I'd been given, or taken, or somehow stumbled backward into. And I was going to appreciate every expensive cup of coffee, every heated car ride, every night in an apartment with my name on the lease. I was going to value the good things before I lost them. I'd learned that lesson the hardest way possible. I wasn't going to forget it again. On a Sunday morning in late October, 3 years after Marcus left and 2 years and 11 months after I died and came back, I drove to Michelle's house for breakfast. Her daughters had grown. They were 10 now, all gangly limbs and missing teeth and opinions about everything. We made pancakes together, the girls arguing about whose turn it was to flip. Michelle refereeing with the patient exhaustion of someone who had had this exact argument 5,000 times. "And Alex, oh, do you still have those Pokemon cards?" one of them asked. Emma, the one with curly hair like Michelle's. "Some of them," I said. "I sold a bunch, but I kept my favorites." "Can we see them sometime?" I glanced at Michelle, who shrugged. "If you want to," I said. "They're in a safety deposit box at the bank, though. Pretty boring to look at, honestly. Just cards in plastic cases." "But they're worth a lot of money, right?" Emma pressed. "Mom said you sold some for like $1 million. "Not $1 million, I laughed. "But yeah, quite a bit." "Why did you sell them if they were special?" It was such a kid question. So direct, so uncomplicated by adult understanding of bills and rent and the price of surviving. "Because sometimes," I said slowly, "you have to choose between keeping something special and using it to build something better. And I decided I'd rather have a good life than a collection sitting in a box." "But you kept some," Emma pointed out. "The favorites." "Yeah, I kept some." "That's smart," she declared with the absolute certainty of a 10-year-old. "You should always keep the best ones." After breakfast, after the dishes were washed and the girls had run off to play, Michelle and I sat on her back porch with coffee. The October air was crisp, carrying the smell of fallen leaves and upcoming rain. "You never talk about it," Michelle said. "The breakup. What happened with Marcus? You just moved on." I sipped my coffee, watching squirrels chase each other across the yard. "Not much to talk about. We wanted different things. It ended. I'm better off." "Are you dating anyone?" "Not seriously. Went on a few dates. Nothing clicked." "You're being picky." "I'm being careful," I corrected. "There's a difference," Michelle nodded. "Good. You deserve to be picky. You deserve someone who sees what you're worth." What I'm worth. Once upon a time, in another life, literally, I would have argued, would have deflected, would have made a self-deprecating joke about being worthless cardboard that someone might buy for nostalgia. Now I just said thanks, because I did know my worth now, had learned it through dying and coming back, through watching Marcus walk out and choosing to let him, through selling cards and building businesses and making 1,000 small decisions that added up to a life I didn't want to run from. "I'm proud of you," Michelle said quietly. "I know I've said it before, but I mean it. Whatever happened that made you change, I'm grateful for it." I thought about telling her, thought about trying to explain the impossible, that I'd died and rewound and gotten a second chance that no one should get, that I'd lived through the worst timeline and brought that knowledge back to make better choices, that every good thing in my current life was built on the foundation of my first life's failures. But how could I explain that without sounding insane? So instead, I said, "I'm grateful too," and left it at that. 4 years after the rebirth, 4 years of living a life I died to earn, I got a call from an estate liquidator. "Is this Alex Chen?" a woman's voice asked. "Yeah?" "I'm handling the estate of Kevin Bradshaw. He passed away last month. Car accident, and while going through his storage unit, we found some Pokemon cards with your name on them. Or rather, with a note that says, 'For Alex from Marcus.' We wanted to contact you before we include them in the estate sale." I sat down hard. Kevin's dead? Yes, I'm sorry. Did you know him? Barely. We met once. He was going to buy some cards from me, but the sale fell through. Well, these cards were in his storage. There's about 4 boxes. Should we include them in the sale, or would you like to claim them? 4 boxes. The same 4 boxes I dropped off at Marcus's apartment in the original timeline. The boxes Kevin had bought for $200 and presumably sold for tens of thousands. But in this timeline, I'd kept the cards, had sold them properly, strategically, had built a life from them. So why did Kevin have boxes with my name on them? I'll come look at them, I said. The storage unit was in Kent, a 10x10 space packed with the accumulated debris of Kevin's life. The estate liquidator, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, met me there with a flashlight and a clipboard. "These are the boxes," she said, pointing to 4 white boxes in the back corner. "They were labeled with your name, so we figured they might be yours. I pulled the first box out into the light and opened it. Pokemon cards. But not my father's cards. Different ones. Modern sets, newer printings. Cards from the last 3 or 4 years? These aren't mine," I said, confused. "I've never seen these before." "Huh." The liquidator checked her clipboard. There was a note. Here. She pulled out a folded piece of paper from between 2 boxes. "Does this mean anything to you?" I unfolded it. Marcus's handwriting unmistakable. "Kevin, here are those cards I mentioned. Alex didn't end up needing to sell them after all. Long story. These are from my personal collection, stuff I collected in high school. Nothing valuable. But I know you like Pokemon. Consider it payment for all the beer you've bought me over the years." I stared at the note for a long moment, trying to piece together what had happened. In the original timeline, I'd given Marcus my father's cards. He'd sold them to Kevin. Kevin had sold them for profit. But in this timeline, I'd kept my father's cards, had told Marcus I was keeping them. So Marcus had given Kevin different cards instead, his own cards, to maintain the friendship or the favor or whatever dynamic had been in play. Kevin had held on to them, had stored them, had kept them until his death. These worthless common cards that Marcus had traded for beer money. "These aren't worth anything," I said to the liquidator. "Modern Pokemon cards. You can include them in the estate sale. Someone might buy them for a few dollars." She nodded, making a note on her clipboard. "Thanks for coming down to check. We always try to return personal items if we can." I drove home in a daze, thinking about the weird butterfly effects of changing the past. Kevin was dead in both timelines, but in the original one, he'd died rich from my cards. In this one, he'd died with Marcus's worthless commons. Did it matter? Would Kevin have been happier with money, or had his life been essentially the same either way? I didn't know. Couldn't know. The timelines had diverged too far for me to trace all the consequences of my choices. All I knew was that in this timeline, I was alive, thriving, building something that mattered. And in the original timeline, I was dead. The cards had saved me, not Kevin, me. And I was going to live with that choice and call it grace. 5 years after Marcus walked out that door, 5 years of second chances and hard-won wisdom, I sold the last of my father's cards. Not because I needed the money. My business was doing well. I had savings, investments, retirement accounts. I was stable in ways I'd never been in my first life. I sold them because the market had peaked. Because Pokemon card prices had gone absolutely insane, driven by pandemic nostalgia and stimulus checks and people with too much money and too much time. Because my PSA 10 Charizard was now worth $120,000 and climbing. And I'd learned in my first life that you don't hold on to things just because they're appreciating. You take profits when they're good and diversify. So I sold. Auctioned everything through Heritage, one of the big houses. The Charizard went for $127,000. The complete base set went for $89,000. Various other graded cards brought in another $134,000. After fees and taxes, I cleared $280,000. I put half in index funds, used a quarter to buy a condo in Ballard, my own place with a mortgage I could afford in a neighborhood I loved, gave the remaining quarter to Michelle with instructions to set up college funds for her daughters. "Alex, this is too much," she protested. "It's Pokemon cards," I said. Money I got from selling pictures of cartoon creatures. Dad would want it to go to his granddaughter's education. "He'd be so proud of you," Michelle said, crying again. And I believed her. That night, in my new condo with its view of the locks and its spare bedroom I was converting into an office, I sat on my couch and thought about my father. We'd had 14 years together before cancer took him, 14 years of Sunday mornings and carefully sleeved cards and his patient explanations of types and evolutions, and why Charizard was technically not a dragon type. He died when I was 21, too young to appreciate what I'd lost, too stupid to understand that those Sunday mornings were the real treasure, not the cards we'd sorted together. Now, I was 33, older than I'd lived to be in my first timeline, living a life built on the foundation of his quiet, careful collecting. Every card he'd sleeved, every box he'd labeled, every Sunday morning he dedicated to teaching his kid that some things were worth preserving. "I got it, Dad," I whispered to the empty condo. Took me 2 lives to figure it out, but I got it. Value wasn't in the keeping or the selling. It was in the choosing, in knowing when to hold and when to fold, in building something sustainable instead of just surviving day to day. My father had taught me that, indirectly, through Pokemon cards and Sunday mornings. Marcus had taught me that, inadvertently, by walking out and showing me what I'd accepted as love. And the universe, or God, or quantum mechanics, or whatever force had sent me back to that November afternoon, had given me the chance to learn it twice, to get it right the second time, to build a life instead of just enduring one. I didn't waste that chance. Not this time. 10 years after the rebirth, I married a woman named Diana who'd never heard of Pokemon cards and didn't care that I'd once made a fortune selling them. We met at a design conference. She ran a UX firm in Portland. We bonded over shared contempt for client feedback that started with, "Can you make it pop more?" and ended with 3-hour debates about color theory. Our first date was coffee. Our second was a movie. Our third was a disastrous attempt at cooking dinner together that ended with us ordering pizza and laughing about how we were both hopeless in the kitchen. She proposed to me on a hiking trail in the Cascades, ring in hand, completely unconcerned with traditional gender roles, or who was supposed to ask whom. I said yes immediately. The wedding was small, Michelle and her family, Diana's parents and brother, a handful of close friends. No pomp, no fuss, just vows and cake and dancing to music we'd picked because we liked it, not because it was traditional. Marcus wasn't invited. Hadn't even crossed my mind to invite him. He was part of a life I'd lived and left behind, relevant only as a cautionary tale about settling for less than I deserved. At the reception, Michelle made a toast. "To Alex," she said, raising her glass, "who taught me that it's never too late to start over, who showed me that value isn't in what you keep, but in what you do with it, who turned Pokemon cards into a life." Everyone laughed, clinked glasses, drank. I caught Diana's eye across the room and she smiled at me, that private smile that meant I love you and I'm glad I found you and we're going to build something good together. And I thought, this is it. This is the life I died to earn. Not perfect, not without struggle, but mine. Built on choices I'd made twice, with the wisdom of failure informing my success. The cards were gone, sold, converted into money and then into stability, and then into this moment, standing in a rented event space in Seattle, married to someone who loved me for who I was instead of who they wanted me to be, surrounded by people who'd watched me rebuild myself from the ruins of my first life. My father's Sunday mornings had led to this. Marcus's departure had led to this. My death in a Safeway parking lot had led to this. All of it, the pain and the loss and the impossible second chance, had led to this. And it was worth it. Every card, every choice, every frozen night in my car, every moment of the terrible first timeline, worth it. To get here, to get home. 15 years after the rebirth, I got an email that made me laugh out loud. "Alex, you don't know me, but I bought some Pokemon cards from an estate sale about 10 years ago. They were in a storage unit in Kent. Belonged to a guy named Kevin. The estate liquidator mentioned you'd looked at them but said they weren't valuable. Well, I held on to them and it turns out a few of them are valuable. There's a shadowless Charizard in there that just graded PSA 9. Going to sell it for $15,000. Wanted to say thanks for not claiming them. Changed my life, honestly. Used the money to pay off my student loans. Hope you're doing well, Sarah M." I showed the email to Diana. "The universe has a sense of humor," I said. "Marcus's cards ended up being worth something?" "Apparently. Not as much as Dad's were, but enough to change this Sarah person's life." Diana kissed my forehead. Good for her. Everyone deserves a windfall. Yeah, I agreed. Everyone deserves a second chance. I didn't tell Sarah that I'd had my own windfall, my own second chance, my own impossible do-over. Didn't explain that I'd sold my father's collection for $250,000 and used it to build a life. Just wrote back, "Glad the cards helped you. Good luck with everything." Because that was the thing about second chances, about value, about the weird, chaotic way the universe distributed its gifts. Sometimes you got Pokemon cards worth $80,000 and sold them for $200 because you didn't know better. Sometimes you died in your car and woke up 2 months earlier with a chance to fix everything. Sometimes you found a shadowless Charizard in an estate sale and it paid off your student loans. The universe was random and unfair and occasionally bafflingly kind. You just had to pay attention, had to value what you had before you lost it, had to make choices that led to life instead of slow decline. I'd learned that lesson in the hardest way possible, but I'd learned it. And I was living it. Every day in the life I'd built from the ashes of my first attempt, that was worth more than all the Pokemon cards in the world. 20 years after the rebirth, 20 years of living consciously, carefully, with the bone-deep knowledge that this was my second chance and I would not waste it, I sat in my condo and thought about Marcus for the first time in years. Wondered if he ever thought about those cards. If he remembered offering to sell them for me, if he knew what they'd been worth, if it bothered him that I'd turned my life around so completely after he left. Probably not. People rarely thought about their exes as much as we feared they did. He was probably living his life somewhere, happy with Rachel or whoever had come after Rachel, thinking about me never or only in passing, a footnote to his own story about the relationship that hadn't worked out. And that was fine. I wasn't the person I'd been when he left. Wasn't even the person I'd been when I died in my car, desperate and broken and too proud to ask for help. I was someone new, someone built from the wreckage of that old life and the gift of this second one. Someone who knew the value of Sunday mornings and Pokemon cards and small choices that compounded into destinies. Diana walked into the room, gray starting to thread through her dark hair, reading glasses perched on her nose. "You look pensive," she said, "just thinking about the past. The cards? The cards, and everything else." She sat next to me on the couch, warm and solid and real. "Any regrets?" I thought about it honestly, about Marcus and the years I'd given him, about my father and the time cut short by cancer, about the life I'd lost and the one I'd built to replace it. "No," I said finally. "I got exactly where I needed to be. Just took a longer route than most people." Diana laughed. "That's one way to put it." We sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the sound, turning the water gold and orange and purple. Somewhere in the city, people were making choices. Good ones and bad ones, ones they'd regret, and ones that would save them. Somewhere, someone was holding on to something they should sell. Someone else was selling something they should keep, the great chaotic dance of value and choice and consequence playing out in a million different lives. I'd made my choices, had sold my cards and built my life and married my wife and created something sustainable from the ruins of my first attempt at existing. And if I ever forgot, if I ever started to take it for granted, this second chance life I'd been given, all I had to do was close my eyes and remember. The smell of cheap popcorn, the sound of a duffel bag zipping, the cold Safeway parking lot where I died. And then, the choice to do it differently, to value myself, to hold on to what mattered and let go of what didn't, to build instead of merely survive. That was the real treasure. Not the cards themselves, but what they'd taught me. Value wasn't inherent. It was created through care, through attention, through the conscious choice to preserve what mattered. My father had known that, had shown me through Sunday mornings and carefully sleeved cards. It had taken me 2 lifetimes to understand, but I understood now, and I would never forget again. The light faded over the sound, day becoming evening becoming night. Diana got up to start dinner. I stayed on the couch a moment longer, watching the last rays of sun paint the water in shades of gold. Somewhere in a parallel timeline, maybe, there was a version of me who died in a Safeway parking lot, who'd sold her father's cards for $200 and spiraled into homelessness and frozen to death alone. But that wasn't this timeline. This was the one where I'd come back, where I'd chosen differently, where I'd learned to value what I had before I lost it. This was the life I'd earned by dying and returning and paying attention the second time around. And it was beautiful. Not perfect, not easy, but beautiful in its imperfection, its hard-won stability, its conscious construction. I'd built this. From Pokemon cards and second chances and the quiet wisdom of Sunday mornings, and I would tend it carefully. This life, this second chance existence, because I knew what the alternative looked like. I'd lived it. And I would never go back. Not for all the Pokemon cards in the world.